The past few years have really taken a toll on our trees. Today's certified arborist Andrew Anstrom of Tree Amigos explores how drought and freeze damage continue to impact tree health and what we can do moving forward. Great to see you, Andrew.
Great to see you too.
The past few years, our trees have just really taken a beating.
It really all started in the winter of 2021 when Winter Storm Uri hit. Winter Storm Uri was a really exceptional event where we had really high temperatures in early February. We hit 86, which was a record, followed by a week of extremely low temperatures that then bounced back up to high temperatures.
Right.
And what that did was it told a lot of the trees to begin preparing for spring. And what happens when they prepare for spring is they become much, much more vulnerable to cold damage. So while we saw the trees and shrubs that we expected to die from freeze damage, like the loquats, the viburnum, the figs, we even saw trees that are resistant to cold really suffer and really, die back from this event. So the Arizona ash, the red oaks, the lacebark elms, we saw mature, established trees that should have been able to weather the storm fine just completely plummet and decline. Luckily, that year we had pretty good rainfall following that, which really helped to sustain those trees. But into 2022, we went into a pretty horrible drought. May of 2022 was one of the hottest Mays on record in Austin. So that summer started early and it was extremely dry. And those trees that were stressed from Winter Storm Uri really took another beating and started to decline even further. And we saw a ton of mortality all through our urban forest that summer. And then the icing on the cake was this February, 2023, we saw the ice storm, which was a completely different type of damage. Freeze and drought is more of a physiological stress, whereas this ice storm was more of just a physical, structural stress.
Right.
The damage was simply caused by the sheer weight of the ice. It really affected the live oaks and ash junipers more than other trees because they have persistent foliage through the winter. So they had so much extra surface area for the ice to accumulate on, which really just did a ton of devastation, especially in Northwest Austin, is where I saw the worst of it. And there was even some surprises like our cedar elms, which are deciduous and didn't have a ton of foliage, took a ton of damage. Some were just absolutely ripped apart. In north central Austin, where there's huge stands of them, cedar elm forests, we saw some areas where there's total canopy loss. And massive loss of tree life. Plus the insane drought we're going into, or that we just came through.
Hottest year on record yet again.
It was brutal. We're seeing ancient trees that are in the forest, live oaks that have been there for hundreds of years, just completely die from drought. We're seeing newly planted trees die. We're having a lot of mortality, and it really brings me back to 2011. Which was the last time we had a drought of this significance.
Right.
So the mortality is going to be huge. It has been so hot and so dry that a lot of the fungal pests, a lot of the insects, the normal pests that are a minor nuisance aren't even there. We're just seeing total drought damage. And what that looks like differs from species to species. But it is definitely the most prevailing issue right now is drought damage through our whole urban forest canopy.
Well, let's go through a few of those. I mean, you said that, depending upon the species, maybe some of the common ones, a live oak, cedar, elm, maybe ashes. How are these drought conditions really showing up?
Yeah, they're all a little different. Every species expresses it differently. Live oak's a tricky one. A lot of times they'll have, smaller foliage, and the foliage won't be that deep dark green. But a tricky issue with live oaks is they'll do what we call flashing, where they'll seem perfectly fine, and then within a week, the whole tree will just turn brown. Wow. And you're just way too late. So that's why we generally recommend keeping your live oaks watered, even if they seem like they're okay. The ashes, the foliage will turn yellow and they'll start to defoliate a little bit. Bald cypress have a pretty unique evolution to deal with drought. Their foliage will just brown and they'll just drop their needles and they'll just wait for the next year to start growing again. Monterey oaks, they'll just turn a pale colored foliage. So instead of being dark green, it'll be a much lighter green. Some trees, like figs, they'll lose turgor pressure and the leaves will droop heavily. And then eventually, if they stay drooping and don't get any water, they'll just fall right off. Crepe myrtles do a similar thing. Their leaves will droop, they'll brown, and then they'll fall off if they don't get any water. So every species is a little different.
And is there, I've heard if you see leaf retention versus leaf drop, that's a bit more of an alarming sign too?
It is, because what that indicates is that the tree doesn't have the resources to produce abscisic acid, which is basically the hormone that the plant uses to push the petiole off of the tree. So, when they defoliate in the fall, that's an active process where they're, releasing those leaves. And if they don't even have the energy to do that, it's a really bad sign.
What are some of the best watering practices that we can have right now to help try to offset some of this impact?
Yeah, it's hard to give general advice about watering because every soil's different, every tree's needs different, the size of the tree, there's a lot of variables, but there's really 4 basic points that can be consistently applied across our urban forest that will really help you have success with watering. The number one, I think, would be to have a mulch layer. You want 3 to 4 inches of mulch over as much of the root zone of the tree that you're possibly willing to mulch.
So that would be maybe the critical root zone to the drip line, or whatever you can do?
As much as you're willing to do. That would be ideal. That's a huge mulch ring on some trees. If you could do that, the tree would be very happy. It does a lot of things. It gets rid of any competition, so there's no grasses competing for the moisture. It helps, make every watering event more available to the tree, sometimes up to 40%. It slowly adds nutrients to the soil. It also does a really important thing of buffering the soil temperature from the Texas heat. If you just have bare soil and that Texas heat is beating down on it, it'll accelerate the drying process. Mulch really is the magic potion when it comes to tree health. The second thing I would say is to water deep. And what that essentially means is to get water to at least the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. This can be best achieved using a soaker hose or drip tubing, a slow release of water over a long period of time. And you want to try to apply that water over as much of the root zone or the root plate as possible. Anywhere on the roots is good, but if you think about the roots like a spoke on a bike tire, like the spokes on a bike tire, the closer in, you're going to have more spokes, so it'll get more water, but really you want to try and get as much of the root zone as possible.
So what would be the sign of maybe you're too late?
The sign of being too late, I would say, you really want to wait to see if the tree will come back the next spring. So I always like to say, see if it'll come back late spring or early summer. If there's no foliage by that time, the tree's pretty much gone.
And if people do have to replace trees, when's going to be that ideal time to replace those trees?
October, November are the best months for most of our trees. With fruit trees, a lot of times it can make sense to wait until March to try and dodge that last freeze. But most trees you want to get in fall so that they have all winter to put down roots to prepare for the summer.
You've mentioned that all these different species are affected differently. Might that be a reason to look at planting a diverse canopy in your yard or on your property?
It's always a good thing to have a diverse urban forest. I think the main reason for that is resilience of the urban forest as a whole. Whenever we have these single events that cause a lot of damage to certain species, if every tree was a live oak, the ice storm would have been much worse. If every tree was an ash, then the day emerald ash borer gets here, we'd lose every single tree. So by having a good mix, you can be sure that the canopy layer will never be too affected by one environmental extreme or another.
It sounds like there's just a lot of complexity and nuance to really determining what's going on. Why would a person really want to hire a certified arborist versus a tree guy, so to speak?
A certified arborist is dictated by the International Society of Arboriculture. It requires that you have a minimum of 3 years of experience in the field and that you pass a test that was prepared by professionals all across the world. When you get a certified arborist, you know they at least have the base level layer of knowledge that's going to, have them make the best recommendations for your trees.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I know this has been a really pressing question for a lot of people.
Thanks for having me.
Now, folks, we're going to check in with Daphne Richards.